What happens when one of the world's most brilliant minds walks into a courtroom, not as a defendant, but as his own attorney? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It started with a knock. Not the kind you hear in movies, the soft, hesitant tap of someone unsure if they're welcome. No, this was a federal knock. Heavy. Certain. The kind that makes your heart skip even if you've done nothing wrong. Elon Musk looked up from his desk at the SpaceX Hawthorne headquarters, eyebrow raised. His monitors displayed satellite trajectories, engine diagnostics, and something abstract only he could interpret. But all that paused when the door creaked open and his assistant, Maya, peeked in, her face pale. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "From the DOJ." Elon stood slowly. "Send them in." Two agents in black suits entered the room. One carried a manila folder. The other didn't say a word. The taller agent, whose name tag read J. Matthews, placed the folder on the desk. "You've been served." The room stayed silent long after the agents left. Elon didn't open the folder right away. He just stared at it. Subpoena. Federal court. Class action suit. Corporate sabotage. That night, the headlines exploded. Breaking: Elon Musk faces massive lawsuit from energy conglomerate. $30 billion at stake. Tesla board shaken. Musk responds, "I'll represent myself." It was that last part that flipped the world on its head. At first, everyone assumed it was a joke. Maybe even a marketing stunt. Surely the richest man on earth wouldn't risk everything by walking into federal court without legal representation. But then came the press conference. Elon, in a plain black t-shirt and jeans, stood behind a podium in front of the Tesla Gigafactory. "No lawyer," he said simply. "I trust my brain more than I trust any firm." He didn't blink. Didn't elaborate. Just turned and walked away, leaving 1,000 cameras flashing behind him. The courtroom was colder than it needed to be. People packed the gallery wall to wall, journalists, analysts, bloggers, fans, haters, lawyers from both coasts. Some had flown in from other countries just to see what the hell Elon Musk thought he was doing. He walked in 5 minutes early, calm as ever. No entourage. No notes. Judge Meredith Langley raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Musk, where is your counsel?" Elon smiled politely. "You're looking at him." Langley sighed. "You do understand the gravity of what you're facing?" "Intimately." Across the room sat Preston Vale, the legal equivalent of a nuclear bomb in a suit. Harvard Law. 10 wins out of 10 in corporate takedowns. He was known for speaking softly and winning loudly. He didn't even look up from his phone when Musk walked in. The opening statement belonged to Vale. "This case is about accountability," he began, standing like he owned the courtroom. "It's about power used recklessly, systems broken deliberately, and billions lost in the process." He painted Musk as a brilliant mind gone rogue. A man who manipulated energy markets by intentionally tanking contracts, exploiting gray zones in government subsidies, and using SpaceX technology in ways that violated international trade laws. Musk listened without flinching. He tapped a pen against his knuckle, calculating something invisible to everyone else. "And now," Vale concluded, "this man thinks he can bypass the law, by treating this courtroom like a TED Talk." Laughter rippled through the gallery. Then it was Elon's turn. He stood, stepped forward, and looked directly at the jury. "I'm not a lawyer," he said. "I'm just a guy who likes physics and rockets. But I also understand systems. And law, when you strip away the words, is just another system." His voice was calm, almost soothing. "I know how systems can be gamed. I know how people with money bend rules to punish innovation. And I'm here because I believe this case isn't about what I've done. It's about who I am, and what they're afraid I'll do next. He pointed at the table where Vale sat. These people don't want a trial. They want a muzzle. Judge Langley raised a hand. Mr. Musk. He stopped. Nodded. Understood, Your Honor. And then he sat back down. The courtroom didn't quite know what to do with itself. Later that night, on X, formerly Twitter, the clips went viral. Hashtags trended. Hashtag Musk versus the world. Hashtag Courtroom Musk. Hashtag Elon goes solo. Opinion split down the middle. Half said he was crazy. Arrogant. Self-destructive. The other half? They thought it was genius. Revolutionary. David versus Goliath, except David brought a flamethrower. Back at his private workspace, Elon opened a bottle of Diet Coke, pulled up a multi-monitor legal dashboard he'd coded himself, and whispered one word. Let's begin. Long before the lawsuits, the rockets, or the electric cars, there was just a boy, with a stutter, a stack of science fiction books, and too many questions. Pretoria, South Africa. 1984. The sun beat down on the cracked pavement as young Elon wandered the schoolyard, clutching a copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy like it was a shield. He wasn't just reading it, he was decoding it, breaking down the logic of absurdity. Kids twice his size mocked his accent, his awkward silences, the way he'd zone out mid-conversation, as if calculating the weight of a planet rather than participating in playground politics. But he wasn't zoning out. He was building. At home, Elon's world stretched infinitely. The walls of his room were lined with gadgets, schematics, and boxes of spare parts. He built a computer from scrap at 12. By 13, he'd programmed a space-themed video game, and sold it for $500. His parents praised him, but even back then, he saw something cold behind their smiles. Success, to them, wasn't about discovery. It was about survival. Appearances. His father, Errol, was a puzzle Elon could never solve. Brilliant, yes. But dark. Controlling. The kind of man who could take apart an engine blindfolded and take apart a person even faster. Elon never talked about the specifics. He didn't have to. The silence between them said it all. When Elon left for Canada at 17, it wasn't just to find opportunity, it was to find oxygen. A place to think, to grow, to be weird out loud. Stanford University, 1995. Elon arrived for a PhD in applied physics. He left 2 days later. Why? A professor asked, baffled. There's a revolution happening on the internet, Elon replied. I'd rather code it than write about it. He didn't say it with arrogance. Just certainty. Within a year, he'd co-founded Zip2 with his brother Kimball, sleeping in the office and showering at the YMCA. They sold it for $300 million. Next. X.com, then PayPal. Then eBay bought them out. Money came fast. But so did enemies. In those early days, Elon learned quickly, when you change the system fights back. He also learned something else, lawyers love paper more than truth. That lesson came hard. In 2000, during a boardroom coup at PayPal, Elon was ousted while on his honeymoon. They'd waited until he was on a plane to Australia, out of reach, out of signal. He came back to find himself reassigned. He never forgot the look on the board's face. Cold. Professional. Legal. That's when the obsession with law began. At night, while launching SpaceX, he'd read old court rulings, study precedent, challenge logic in Supreme Court transcripts. Not because he wanted to be a lawyer, but because he wanted to understand the game he kept being thrown into. He didn't talk about it. He just studied. Learned. Stored everything. I don't like rules, he once told a friend. But if I have to play by them, I'll know them better than anyone. By 2022, Elon Musk was a household name. Some loved him. Some hated him. But everyone watched. To the public, he was the meme king. The Doge father. The guy who smoked weed on Joe Rogan and shot cars into space. But behind the sarcasm, there was something else: strategy. Every tweet was a move. Every scandal, a stress test. And behind the curtain, always, calculations. He didn't just want to build companies. He wanted to build a better species. Smarter. Braver. Unafraid of risk. Because to Elon, playing it safe was the real failure. Which is why, when the lawsuit came, he didn't run. He remembered all of it: the childhood beatings, the PayPal betrayal, the way people treated him like a joke every time he colored outside the lines. So when the DOJ subpoena hit his desk and the media exploded, Elon made a decision. This time, I fight. Not with lawyers. Not with money. With everything I am. His team begged him to reconsider. Elon, this is suicide, said his chief legal officer. Preston Vale eats companies like ours for breakfast. He's not going to play fair. I'm counting on it, Elon said. They didn't get it. But he wasn't trying to win like a CEO. He was playing this game like an engineer, mapping inputs, breaking patterns, reading the system like code. He stayed up every night that week, rereading the Constitution, dissecting court transcripts, simulating cross-examinations using a custom-built AI that modeled jury reactions based on tone, diction, and emotion. When Maya, his assistant, peeked in on the third night, he was surrounded by open law books and half-drunk cans of Diet Coke. Trying to reinvent legal defense, she teased. He looked up. No. Just trying to understand the problem set. By the time court convened, Elon didn't walk in as a man who was forced into defending himself. He walked in like someone who chose to. The suit wasn't flashy. No tie. He didn't posture, didn't pace. He just sat there, silent and still, waiting for his moment. To outsiders, it looked like arrogance. To those who knew him, it was something else entirely. Preparation. Patience. Precision. The boy who once read sci-fi to escape the cruelty of the world now stood ready to bend that world with sheer intellect. And as Preston Vale prepared his attack, confident that Elon was just another ego waiting to be broken, Musk smiled quietly to himself. He wasn't there to defend. He was there to reprogram the system. Some men walk into a courtroom to argue the law. Preston Vale walks in to win. He didn't bother glancing at Elon the first day of the trial. Why would he? Vale had gone up against tech CEOs, senators, crypto founders, and hedge fund legends, and crushed them all. In his world, lawsuits weren't just battles. They were art. A perfect cross-examination was his symphony. A jury swing. His standing ovation. And now, he was playing his most high-profile symphony yet. Musk vs. Dominion Consortium. Behind that name was a shadowy network of old money, fossil fuel barons, and telecom giants. Together, they'd created Dominion, a holding company with deep investments in global energy. Their profits had tanked after Tesla's vertical integration model made half their infrastructure obsolete. They blamed Musk. And they wanted blood. Vale was their hired sword. 6'2". Salt and pepper hair. Custom suits tailored in Milan. His voice could sell you a war, and you'd thank him for the privilege. In law school, they said Vale could win a case without using a single piece of evidence. Just rhetoric and perfectly timed silences. He didn't just understand legal loopholes. He practically designed them. So when Dominion's board voted to take Musk down, there was only ever one name they considered. Preston Vale read the subpoena request like it was a script he'd written himself. Build it on sabotage, he told his team. Target his manipulation of carbon credit markets. SpaceX's government contracts. Tesla's backdoor patents. Won't that look desperate? His junior partner asked. Vail smiled. It is desperate. But that's the point. The media played along like an orchestra. The most dangerous man in tech meets the sharpest mind in law. Preston Vail is here to end the Musk era. On the morning of day 3, Vail finally looked at Elon, just a glance, like checking the weight of a pawn on a chessboard. Elon looked right back. No smirk. No nerves. Just, calculation. Vail didn't like that. Most defendants sweated under his stare. Musk looked like he was debugging him. The first witness was Dominion's CTO, a gray-suited lifer who claimed that Elon's open-source battery architecture allowed Tesla to create a monopoly while gutting the licensing rights of smaller energy startups. He undercut the industry, the CTO said, voice shaking slightly. He destabilized an entire sector. Elon, sitting at his own desk, didn't object. Didn't flinch. Just took notes. Silently. Vail turned to the jury. Mr. Musk isn't a disruptor. He's a saboteur. He's hidden behind innovation, but his intent was to cripple competition and consolidate control. He let that hang in the air. Judge Langley looked toward Elon. Mr. Musk, would you like to cross? Elon stood, calm as ever. Walked to the stand. Mr. Reynolds, Elon said, addressing the CTO, do you know how many patents Tesla has made open source since 2014? No, Reynolds said, shifting. Over 300, Elon replied. And how many times has your company implemented one? Silence. 0, Elon said for him. Not because we blocked you. But because you refused to evolve. Objection. Sustained. But the damage was done. Vail wasn't rattled. In fact, he was smiling. He leaned toward his associate. He's going off book, Vail whispered. Classic engineer move. He thinks he can out-logic the law. He tapped a folder in front of him. Thick. Labeled, Exhibit 17B, Internal Comms. Let's show him what chaos feels like. The next morning, Vail dropped the bomb. Your Honor, he said, standing before the court, we submit into evidence a series of internal emails, between Mr. Musk and members of his executive team, where he refers to Dominion as dinosaurs who deserve to go extinct. Murmurs filled the room. And worse, Vail continued, he appears to direct teams to delay contract responses with government agencies until certain competing infrastructures, owned by Dominion, fail. He let that sink in. Then turned to Elon. Care to explain that? Elon blinked once. Twice. Then replied, sure. Those emails were taken out of context. Classic, Vail shot back, pacing toward the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, when someone with this much power plays context as a defense, that's not clarity, it's damage control. He rested his hands on the rail. Elon Musk isn't fighting the system. He's rigging it. That night, every major outlet ran the story. Leaked emails suggest Musk sabotaged competitors. Elon's extinction plan surfaces in court. Vail dismantles Musk's defense, one line at a time. Tesla's stock dipped. Again. On X, the hashtags flipped. Hashtag Musk on the edge. Hashtag Emailgate. Hashtag This is why we need lawyers. But in the quiet of his office, Elon sat unmoved. He replayed the trial footage. Not the content, the micro-expressions. Eye twitches. Vocal spikes. The way Vail smirked before launching the exhibit. He wasn't panicking. He was plotting. Meanwhile, Vail enjoyed a quiet dinner with Dominion CFO at a rooftop restaurant in D.C. You'll have a ruling in 3 weeks, he promised over wine. He won't survive discovery. You sure? Absolutely, Vail said. He brought logic to a war of emotion. Judges don't rule on code. They rule on narrative. And his story is about to collapse. He raised his glass. To the end of an era. Back in California, Maya walked into Elon's office, visibly worried. They want a settlement, Elon. You could end this. He didn't even look up from his screen. That's not the mission, he said. What is the mission? He finally looked at her. To show them the system they trust is broken, Elon said. And to prove one person can still rewrite it. By sunrise, Elon Musk wasn't just trending. He was everywhere. Cable news anchors scrambled to decode the courtroom bombshells. Podcasts were spinning up emergency episodes. Financial analysts whispered about a possible Tesla collapse. And on X, Elon's own platform, the narrative was splitting down the middle like a fault line. He's lost it. This is performance art. Legend move. Arrest him. One post went viral with over 4 million likes. Elon Musk, CEO, inventor, agent of chaos, now, courtroom gladiator. Hashtag Musk vs Goliath. Hashtag Elon vs Bale. At Tesla HQ, the boardroom felt like a war room. Phones buzzed non-stop. Legal staff paced the carpet, whispering urgently. Investors were demanding explanations, and, increasingly, alternatives. Elon needs to stand down, one board member snapped. Hire counsel. Issue an apology. Offer a deal. Others nodded. Quietly. Nervously. Deep down, no one wanted to go against him. But the optics were starting to poison everything. PR crises were one thing. A $30 billion lawsuit and an erratic courtroom strategy. That was blood in the water. Outside, protesters began forming lines, some against Musk, others for him. College students waved signs that read, "Let Elon cook. Don't stop the future. This is bigger than business." Meanwhile, Dominion's media machine fired on all cylinders. A leaked memo landed on every major outlet. It suggested Tesla had knowingly delayed supply chain responses to competitors while influencing government subsidies to favor Musk's ecosystem. Was Tesla's success engineered? Or rigged? Wall Street News now. Exclusive, emails reveal Musk's hidden kill switch strategy. The Political Chronicle. Dominion wasn't playing defense. They were setting the narrative, brick by brick. And for the first time in a while, Elon wasn't in control of the conversation. Or at least, that's what they thought. Inside SpaceX's mission control, Elon sat surrounded by engineers who had been with him through Falcon 1 failures, last-second launch scrubs, and orbital miracles. But today, he wasn't reviewing telemetry. He was analyzing sentiment data. Real-time feeds from social, radio, cable, YouTube, subreddits, and private message boards, all parsed by a custom AI he coded over a weekend. Panic spikes every time fraud gets mentioned, Maya said, scanning the dashboard. But interestingly, self-representation is polling positive. They want to see a fight, Elon muttered. Not a win. A fight. He tapped the screen, zooming into an influencer chart. The top 50 creators talking about the case. You think we can flip this? Maya asked. I don't need everyone to believe me, Elon said. I just need enough of them to question everything. An hour later, Elon tweeted. They're scared of questions. Not answers. I'm just here to ask better ones. That alone racked up 12 million views in 3 hours. He followed it up with a meme, Judge Judy holding a rocket launcher, captioned. How I'm feeling tomorrow morning. Hashtag let Elon cook. That same night, a viral video dropped titled, Elon isn't crazy. He's playing 4D chess. Created by a 22-year-old YouTuber named Camtech, it broke down the lawsuit like a thriller, complete with music cues, courtroom footage, and slow-mo shots of Elon sipping Diet Coke. What if, just what if, this isn't Elon losing his mind? What if this is him showing us how rigged it's all been the entire time? The video exploded, 13 million views in 24 hours. Spotify podcast started quoting it. Journalists began using its phrases. 4D chess. Legal anarchist. The anti-system suit. But for every fan he gained, Elon gained twice as many enemies. Dominion's PR firm flooded the airwaves with experts. Former federal prosecutors. Ethics professors. CEOs. All of them warning about the danger of letting billionaires believe they're above the law. Elon Musk is dismantling faith in legal institutions. He's weaponizing his following to intimidate the court. This isn't brave. It's reckless. Even SNL couldn't resist. The cold open featured a parody of Elon cross-examining himself. I object, Your Honor. You can't object to yourself. Watch me. It got laughs. But behind those laughs was real fear. Because no one knew what Elon was going to do next. Then came the podcast. Elon hadn't spoken to the press since the trial began. But out of nowhere, he posted a 3-second teaser. Live tonight, no filters. No scripts. Just truth. He streamed it from a dimly lit SpaceX hangar, standing between a half-built Starship booster and a whiteboard filled with equations. He didn't yell. Didn't rant. He just explained. I'm not fighting this case because I want to win, he said. I'm fighting because I want everyone watching to see. He pulled up slides, contract loopholes, charts of media ownership, timelines of how Dominion lobbied energy regulators. They're suing me for breaking a system they spent decades breaking first. He paused, looked right at the camera. If I lose this case, fine. But ask yourself, how did we end up in a world where innovation is more dangerous than stagnation? The stream ran for 18 minutes. No music. No production. Just clarity. And it worked. The next morning, the tides began to turn. News anchors who'd once mocked him now admitted, okay, this guy's not crazy. He's making a point. Kamteka's YouTube video hit 22 million views. Tesla's stock rebounded slightly. Not a full recovery, but enough to spark headlines. Is Musk turning the courtroom into his greatest launchpad yet? At Dominion's HQ, Vail watched the stream on mute. He's building something bigger than a defense, his associate said. Vail didn't answer. He just closed the laptop. Then picked up the phone. Pull the next exhibit, he said. All of it. Emails, contracts, board memos. If Musk wants fire, we'll give him nuclear. Back in court, Elon sat alone again. No legal pad. No laptop. Just the calm of a man who already saw the next 5 moves. The judge entered. The crowd silenced. Preston Vail stood. Smiling. Your Honor, he said, we'd like to enter our next round of evidence. It should speak for itself. But Elon was already watching him like a man who knew. The system was finally blinking. The courtroom was still buzzing. You could feel it in the air, tension, curiosity, confusion. Like the room knew something was about to break wide open, but nobody knew what, or who. Judge Langley glanced between the two most unusual courtroom opponents in recent legal memory. Elon Musk, tech titan, defending himself with nothing but logic, instinct, and a brutal understanding of systems. Preston Vail, courtroom killer, representing an empire with bottomless resources and a very public vendetta. Vail stood, straightening his custom-tailored suit. He carried a thick binder filled with classified contracts, internal Tesla memos, and carefully timed leaks. Your Honor, he said, voice calm but dangerous, Dominion Consortium would like to submit a new exhibit set into evidence. The judge nodded. Proceed. Vail turned to the jury. Today, we will show that Mr. Musk, acting with full knowledge and intent, manipulated federal clean energy grants, weaponized government contracts, and delayed strategic shipments, not because it was legal, but because he knew he was too famous to fail. He paused, letting the words echo. You'll hear from whistleblowers. You'll see time-stamped messages, emails from inside Tesla. And you'll understand that this wasn't innovation, it was orchestration. Carefully designed. Ruthlessly executed. He glanced toward Elon. And above all, calculated to make Mr. Musk untouchable. Whispers rolled through the crowd. Journalists scribbled like mad. Hashtags began forming mid-trial. Hashtag untouchable. Hashtag Courtroom Musk. Hashtag system versus soul. But Elon didn't move. No shifting. No blinking. No objections. He stood slowly, walked to the center of the room, and adjusted the microphone like he'd done it 100 times. He didn't open with a defense. Not immediately. Instead, he asked the jury a question. Have you ever built something so different, people tried to burn it down just because they didn't understand it? Silence. He paced. Not out of nervousness, but rhythm. I'm not a lawyer. I'm an engineer. And engineers break things for a living. That's how we build better ones. He turned and looked directly at Vail. This isn't about fraud. It's about fear. They're scared of what happens when disruption works too well. Elon tapped on the court smartboard and pulled up a chart, Tesla's patent policy from 2014, when he made hundreds of innovations open source. This is what sabotage looks like, he asked. Giving away technology for free? He tapped again. This time, showing a timeline of Dominion lobbying efforts, campaign donations, regulatory delays, internal messages pressuring senators to vote against EV subsidies. This is what they're defending, Elon said. A model that's been rotting for decades. Vail stood, clearly ready for that one. If that's your justification, Mr. Musk, are you telling this court that your actions were necessary? No, Elon replied calmly. I'm telling you they were inevitable. It wasn't the argument anyone expected. Elon wasn't claiming innocence in the traditional sense. He wasn't saying, I didn't do it. He was saying, I did it because no one else would, and if I hadn't, we'd still be pretending the future was 10 years away. But Vail wasn't done. He snapped his fingers, and his associate rolled out a new screen, Exhibit 21, a leaked Slack message from inside SpaceX. Musk, 2:14 a.m. Let them sue. The moment this hits court, we open the floodgates. They'll look worse. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Care to explain that? Vail asked. Elon didn't hesitate. Sure, he said. That wasn't a threat. It was a reality check. He turned to the judge, then the jury. They thought this case would scare me into silence. But this courtroom? This is the loudest place I've ever spoken. At Dominion's HQ, the internal Slack was melting down. He's flipping the narrative. Media's starting to buy in. We need to regain control. Vail, watching from inside the courtroom, wasn't panicked. But something had shifted. He'd drawn first blood, and yet somehow, Elon had bled on his own terms. Later that evening, Maya found Elon pacing in the SpaceX lot, watching engineers run static fire tests on a Raptor engine. You know they're going to dig deeper, right? She said. They're going after your personal life next. Good, Elon said. Good. The more they dig, the more they expose their playbook. Once the world sees how the system defends itself, they'll stop trusting it. He turned to her, eyes tired but steady. They think I'm trying to win this case. I'm not. I'm trying to break the fourth wall. Meanwhile, Preston Vail was prepping his next move. He opened a folder titled, Musk, Settlement Proposal D, Internal Use Only. He stared at it for a long time. Then he closed it. Not yet, he whispered to himself. Let's see how far he's willing to go. Because now, it wasn't just about courtrooms. It was about ideology. And neither man was willing to blink first. The email leaked at 4:17 a.m. Subject line, he's lying. I was there. From, anonymous former exec at protonmail.com. To, New York Ledger, Wired, The Intercept, and 3 tech whistleblower subreddits. Attached were 5 encrypted PDFs, each one containing internal correspondence between Elon and former high-ranking members of Tesla's logistics and compliance teams. Some were mundane. Others weren't. Delay shipments to Nevada, wait until the governor signs the clean air bill. Push suppliers to renegotiate terms by floating a federal review risk. Don't respond to Dominion's bid. Let them choke. By noon, every major news outlet was screaming the same headline in different fonts. Musk's inner circle cracks. Former Tesla exec accuses Elon of market manipulation. Billionaire turned puppet master. But the real shocker wasn't the emails. It was who leaked them. At SpaceX HQ, Maya walked into Elon's office carrying a tablet. Her face was pale. You need to see this. Elon glanced at the screen. His jaw tightened, but only for a second. He already knew. It was Brad Connolly. Elon's former VP of Regulatory Affairs. Harvard Law grad. One of the first suits he ever trusted. Brad had joined Tesla in 2015 and had been instrumental in securing early infrastructure partnerships, before leaving abruptly in 2021. Officially, he'd left to pursue family priorities. Unofficially, he left after Elon accused him of leaking a strategy memo to Dominion consultants. Brad denied it. Elon never confronted him again. Just locked him out of all internal systems the next day. And now, here he was, ghost emailing every major journalist on the planet. The next morning, Vail stood in court holding a glossy printout of the leak. Your Honor, the integrity of this case has just shifted, he said. We now have direct testimony from a former Tesla executive, someone who sat in the very rooms Mr. Musk claims were clean. He turned toward Elon. You call yourself an innovator. But what are you really, Mr. Musk, if your innovation came from silence, not scale? Elon stood. Walked slowly toward the stand. I'm exactly what I've always said I was, he said. A guy who hates inefficiency more than he fears backlash. He paused, locking eyes with Vail. You think this leak hurts me. But it only proves what I've been trying to show this whole time, that the system doesn't punish liars. It rewards them when it fits the story. Outside the courtroom, the chaos was immediate. Is Musk losing control? Ex-exec's testimony may be final nail. How far will Elon go to rewrite the system? But in the trenches of the internet, in Reddit threads, X polls, YouTube live streams, the divide was shifting. A post from user at QuarkEngineer89 read. If this guy really worked for Elon and kept quiet for years, why leak now? Right before Vail's final arguments. He's not a whistleblower. He's a pawn. That post was shared over 100,000 times within hours. Back at Dominion's legal command center, Vail poured himself a whiskey. He's turning every attack into proof of the system's rot, his associate muttered. Exactly, Vail said. He knew it. Musk was more than slippery, he was adaptive. The more pressure they applied, the more Elon morphed the attack into a signal boost. And worse, he was doing it all while technically telling the truth. That's what made him dangerous. That's what made him different. Vail opened a drawer and pulled out a flash drive labeled Nova. It wasn't evidence. It was something else entirely. Insurance. That evening, in a parking garage beneath a quiet building in Palo Alto, Maya met with Kimball Musk. Elon trusts you more than anyone, she said. I'm his brother, Kimball replied. She nodded. That's why I need to know, if he pushes this too far, will he listen to you? Kimball looked away for a second. Then shook his head. He listens. But he only follows logic. Not fear. Not caution. Just logic. Maya sighed. Then we better make sure his logic still leads somewhere we can survive. The next day in court, Vale made his move. We'd like to call a surprise witness, he said, voice calm. The doors opened. Brad Connolly walked in. Clean-shaven. Black suit. Cool as stone. He took the stand, raised his hand, and swore in. Elon didn't move. Mr. Connolly, Vale began, did Mr. Musk ever instruct you to delay federal documentation to sabotage Dominion bids? Brad nodded. Yes. Did he do so knowing the economic impact on his competitors? Yes. Did you object? I voiced concerns. He told me to let the dinosaurs scream. The courtroom gasped. Vale smiled. No further questions. Elon stood. Walked up slowly. Looked Brad in the eye. Why'd you wait 4 years to say something? Brad didn't answer. Why leak to the media instead of the court? Silence. Why take $1 million settlement from Dominion's lobbying branch 6 months after you left Tesla? The courtroom shifted. Vale objected. No proof of that exists. Elon reached into his coat and pulled out a document, one Dominion never expected to see. Maya had found it. Hidden in a Canadian tax filing. Elon handed it to the judge. Then let's make it exist. The courtroom was silent as the judge flipped through the documents Elon had handed over. The air was thick with tension, no one was sure where this was going, but everyone knew it was big. Brad Connolly, the once trusted VP of Regulatory Affairs, sat on the witness stand, sweat beading at his temples. His eyes flicked nervously between the judge, the jury, and Elon. He had been too confident walking in here. But now, with this bombshell of evidence, his position was beginning to crack. Judge Langley cleared his throat. Mr. Musk, if what you're suggesting is true, this would be a serious violation of both corporate ethics and legal standards. You are implying Mr. Connolly took a bribe? Elon didn't flinch. Not just a bribe, Your Honor, he said, his voice steady. A coordinated effort to sabotage not just my company but the future of an entire industry. Brad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but his lawyer immediately stood up. Objection, Your Honor. This is pure speculation. There is no concrete evidence to support Mr. Musk's allegations. Elon wasn't deterred. I'm not speculating. I'm presenting facts. And right here, we have proof that Mr. Connolly not only accepted a payout but was complicit in undermining Tesla's federal agreements with Dominion Consortium. He motioned to the document on the judge's desk, a signed settlement agreement between Dominion and Connolly, which was clearly stamped with a large, confidential, warning. The audience leaned in, murmurs spreading through the room. Brad's face turned a shade paler. His lawyer's objections fell flat. The jury's eyes were locked on him now. Later that day, after the court session had ended, Elon sat quietly in the back of the courtroom, his gaze fixed on the stack of files in front of him. The game had changed. Do you think we've gone too far? Maya asked, standing by his side. No, Elon replied, shaking his head slowly. We've just started showing how deep the rot goes. But even as he said it, he knew the consequences of this move wouldn't be clean. He was crossing lines now, lines that no one in Silicon Valley had dared to cross before. Back at Dominion's headquarters, Preston Vale was fuming. His mind was racing, calculating the next move. The public relations nightmare wasn't the real problem, it was the fact that Brad Connolly was beginning to unravel under the weight of Elon's accusations. Vale's strategy had been to let the whistleblower's testimony be the nail in Musk's coffin. But now, the whistleblower was turning into the fall guy, and that wasn't part of the plan. He called a private meeting with his legal team and Dominion's higher-ups. "We need to shut this down," he said, voice low and urgent. "If Connolly cracks, this whole thing could blow up in our faces. It's not just about Musk anymore, it's about keeping control of everything he's exposed." His chief strategist, a sharp-eyed woman named Carol, nodded. "We could suppress the leak. Move quickly to discredit the documents Musk presented." Vail shook his head. "No. We need to go after him, hard. Make this personal. He's got something he wants to prove, and right now, he's winning. We need to take the win away from him." Carol paused, then offered an idea. "What if we bring in his people? Get the board members who left Tesla to say that they were aware of Musk's methods long before Brad Connolly's resignation. We need someone from inside his empire to confirm it." Vail smiled, his expression turning dangerous. "Now that's an idea." Meanwhile, Elon was already thinking 2 steps ahead. He knew that Dominion would try to fight back. They would try to paint him as a rogue billionaire who was playing with fire, who cared more about his ego than the truth. But Elon was no stranger to being underestimated. He was about to turn the narrative on its head. That night, after a long session of phone calls with his lawyers, he met with a select group of trusted former executives. Most of them had left Tesla years ago after disagreements with his management style, but they still respected him. More importantly, they were loyal. "Brad Connolly's not the only one they're going after," Elon said, pacing in front of the group. "We've got to make sure that this isn't just about one man's betrayal. This is about the system that's been built to protect the powerful." He turned to one of his former VPs, a woman named Lena, who had left Tesla just 6 months ago. "I need you to make the call. To the guys who walked out. We need their testimony. We need them to come forward and show that this wasn't just me, it's a systemic problem." Lena nodded, her face grim. "You know what this means, right? They're going to attack them just as hard as they're attacking you." "I know," Elon said. "But if we don't fight back, if we don't show what's been going on for decades, then everything we've built doesn't mean a damn thing." Back in the courtroom, the next session was explosive. Vail had brought in 2 of Musk's former executives who had agreed to testify about the so-called toxic culture within Tesla. They claimed that Musk's vision was too singular, that his leadership style had created a cult of personality that encouraged ruthless decision-making without regard for long-term consequences. But Elon wasn't fazed. When it was his turn, he asked for a rebuttal. "Let me ask you all something," Elon said, standing tall. "How many of you in this room are truly willing to bet your life on what you believe in? How many of you would sacrifice everything for a cause you think will change the world?" He let the question linger in the air, his eyes scanning the jury. "I'm not here to convince you that I'm perfect. I'm here to show you that what we've done, what I've done, matters. Because the alternative is continuing the same broken system that's destroyed progress for decades." He paused, then looked directly at the 2 executives on the stand. "You want to know why I took risks? Because I couldn't afford not to." The courtroom was in an uproar. Elon's statement hit harder than any evidence, any document. He had just flipped the entire narrative again. The next morning, the court buzzed with tension. The whispers in the hallway were louder than the gavel slamming for attention. Elon Musk was still standing tall, but the people surrounding him, those closest to him, were starting to unravel. His inner circle, the very people who had once stood with him, were now increasingly divided. And with every new betrayal, the weight on his shoulders grew heavier. Inside the courtroom, Vail was having a private conversation with the judge before the next session started. "Your Honor, if we can't find a way to neutralize Musk's claims of systemic corruption, we're going to lose the public. We need to tighten the noose around his operations. I don't care how much we have to dig, everything Musk has built needs to be questioned." Judge Langley listened intently, rubbing his chin. "You're asking me to allow you to introduce more testimonies about Musk's business practices and internal operations?" "Yes, but not just any testimonies. I need someone who can take his credibility apart from the inside. Someone who can say it all. Vale's eyes narrowed, a cold smile forming. Someone close to Musk, who knows what it's really like to work with him. In a sleek downtown Los Angeles office, Kimball Musk sat at a desk, staring at a stack of legal papers in front of him. His phone buzzed across the table, but he didn't pick it up. His mind was somewhere else, somewhere he didn't want to go. His brother had just called him. Elon was running out of allies, and Kimball knew exactly where this was going. But he also knew this game couldn't end in a way that left either of them standing unscathed. Brad Connolly. Lena. And now, it was time for Kimball to make a choice. The same choice he had hoped would never come. A text came through. From Maya. I need you to come in. It's critical. In court, the jury was shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Every new witness seemed to chip away at Elon's defenses, but still, he stood his ground. His lawyers had introduced the latest piece of evidence, a conversation he'd had months ago with a government official, discussing the long-term strategy of the American electric car market. The transcripts painted a picture of Elon Musk as a visionary, a businessman who would stop at nothing to push boundaries, even if it meant breaking every rule in the book. Vale's strategy was working. Slowly, methodically, he was chipping away at Musk's claim to ethical business. But in the end, Vale knew that Musk's true strength lay in his image, not just his intellect. And that was what he needed to destroy. Vale called his next witness. The doors to the courtroom opened with a creak, and the next figure to step in caught everyone by surprise. It wasn't just anyone. It was Lena, one of Elon's most trusted executives. Her appearance shocked the room. She had left Tesla years ago, publicly citing differences in strategy and management. But the truth was darker. She knew more about the inner workings of Musk's world than anyone. And she had every reason to speak out now. She took the stand, her eyes cool, betraying no emotion. Her testimony had the potential to shatter everything. Vale leaned in with calculated precision. Lena, you've worked with Mr. Musk for over a decade. Can you confirm that Tesla has, on numerous occasions, pushed the boundaries of legality to secure market advantages? Specifically, did Mr. Musk direct operations that aimed to sidestep environmental regulations for profit? Lena didn't hesitate. Yes. A hush spread across the room. Can you detail the extent of these operations? Lena took a deep breath. She knew the gravity of what she was about to say. Elon Musk wanted to change the world. But he also wanted to ensure that change benefited him first. There were many instances where Tesla's operations bent, and sometimes broke, environmental laws. He'd push for new technologies without understanding the legal ramifications, and when regulations got in the way, we'd find ways to make them disappear. Elon's lawyers shot him a panicked look, but he remained unmoved. His eyes were fixed on Lena, his face hard. Mr. Musk had his reasons, as he always does, she continued. But those of us who stayed with him knew that at the core of his decisions wasn't always innovation, it was survival. Vale smiled, his victory near. Thank you, Ms. Lena. The courtroom was buzzing with energy. The tension was palpable. Elon sat still, but he could feel the walls closing in on him. Later that night, Maya and Elon met in a small, private room at a restaurant downtown. The blinds were closed, and the soft hum of city traffic filled the background. Elon's face was taut with stress, his fingers drumming on the table. You're looking at a storm, Elon, Maya said quietly. This whole thing is starting to take on a life of its own. If you don't handle this carefully. Elon exhaled sharply. I know. But I'm not backing down. I never have. This isn't about one person's betrayal, it's about exposing the system for what it really is. She leaned in, her tone cautious. Then you need to be prepared for what's coming. Vale is going to go after everyone. They're looking for anyone who has something to say about you, something that can stick. Elon's eyes narrowed. I know. But if they want to go down that road, I'll show them how deep this corruption runs. The next day in court, Elon's team made its move. They called forward one of the last people anyone expected, Kimball Musk. His appearance in the courtroom was almost surreal. Kimball had always been the quieter Musk brother, the one who stayed out of the spotlight. But now, here he was, walking to the stand. His presence was enough to make Vail pause. Kimball took a deep breath, looked around the room, and then began his testimony. Yes, I've worked alongside Elon for years, Kimball started, his voice steady. But let's get one thing clear, Elon Musk didn't build everything by himself. He had help. A team of individuals who believed in his vision. But when you push the boundaries of innovation the way Elon did, not everyone stays on board. That's not the kind of world we live in. Vail cut in, his voice sharp. So, you're suggesting that those who left, like Brad Connolly and Lena, had ulterior motives? Kimball's eyes locked onto Vail's. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating a fact. People leave when they can't keep up. Or when they see an opportunity elsewhere. It's the way the world works. The courtroom was reeling. Kimball had done the unexpected, he had thrown a grenade into Vail's strategy, implying that the very people who were calling for justice had their own motivations. And it was working. As the session adjourned, Maya looked at Elon. This is just the beginning. The courtroom was once again packed, a mixture of journalists, spectators, and legal teams. Elon sat at the defendant's table, looking eerily calm despite the storm raging around him. He had expected this. In fact, he had been preparing for this moment for years, ever since he first began challenging the world's view on technology, space, and electric cars. But nothing had prepared him for the personal cost, the betrayals, the accusations, and the relentless pressure. Today, however, would be different. Today, the tables were about to turn. The sound of the gavel striking brought silence to the room as Judge Langley began the proceedings. Mr. Musk, we have heard testimonies from former employees, we've seen evidence presented by both parties, and we've reviewed the documents submitted. It is now time for you to speak in your own defense, the judge said, looking directly at Elon. Elon stood up slowly, his posture rigid. It wasn't often that he found himself in a situation where the whole world was watching and judging him. He wasn't just a business magnate anymore, he was the face of a movement, and today that movement was on trial. Elon took a deep breath and began speaking. I stand here today, not as a billionaire, not as someone whose wealth or reputation is at stake, but as someone who believes in something far bigger than all of that. I believe in humanity's ability to innovate, to adapt, and to evolve. And that belief has led me to take risks, risks that many in this room have failed to understand. He paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the faces in the room. Some were skeptical, some appeared sympathetic, but he focused on the jury, those who would decide his fate. I have been accused of many things. Of unethical practices, of overstepping boundaries, of creating a toxic culture in my companies. But let me be clear, everything I have done has been for one reason, to ensure that the future we leave behind for our children is a future of opportunity, a future of sustainability. Not just for the rich, not just for the powerful, but for everyone. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Some looked impressed, others unconvinced. But the truth was, Elon's words carried weight. The world had watched him build Tesla, SpaceX, and other ventures that had revolutionized industries. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a force of nature, disrupting the status quo. But now, with everything on the line, he couldn't help but wonder, was his vision worth this? Vail's lawyer, Matthew King, had been waiting for this moment. He stood up, a sly smile crossing his face as he addressed the court. Mr. Musk, while your idealism is admirable, the question before this court is not whether you believe in your mission. It's whether the way you've operated your companies, whether the choices you've made, were done ethically, legally, and in accordance with the values you claim to uphold. Is it true, he continued, that you personally authorized the circumvention of environmental regulations in order to expedite the production of new Tesla vehicles? The room held its breath. Elon's face remained stoic. He had anticipated this line of questioning. He had prepared for it. Not directly, Elon replied, his voice calm but firm. I never authorized the violation of any regulations. What I did, what we all did, was push forward with innovation before the regulatory framework was ready to catch up. In a fast-moving industry, sometimes you have to take risks. And yes, sometimes, regulations fail to keep pace with what's possible. But let's not forget, we're talking about innovation that has saved countless lives and transformed an entire industry. King leaned forward, clearly relishing the moment. And yet, it's been shown that some of your practices led to non-compliance with the very regulations you claim to champion. You pushed Tesla forward by bending the rules, and you knew the consequences of doing so. How do you justify that? Elon didn't flinch. Because the alternative would have been letting others, like Dominion Consortium, set the pace. They weren't innovating. They were comfortable maintaining the status quo. Someone had to take the lead. He paused, allowing his words to hang in the air. And I've always been willing to take responsibility for my actions. That's why I'm here today. Not to run from the consequences, but to face them head-on. But let's be clear, we've changed the world for the better. And if that means making mistakes along the way, then I'll accept them. Because the truth is, we can't afford to wait for the world to catch up. We have to make it happen. The jury was listening intently, many nodding in agreement. But the words hung heavy in the air. Elon was selling more than just an excuse, he was selling his belief in progress, and the belief that failure to act, even in small ways, could be worse than breaking a few rules. King wasn't finished, though. And what about the allegations from Mr. Connolly? The accusations that you pressured him into signing non-disclosure agreements under duress, using your influence to silence potential whistleblowers? Elon's jaw tightened. This was the part he had feared. Mr. Connolly is mistaken, Elon said coldly. I never pressured anyone to stay silent. But let's be honest about why he's testifying today. Brad Connolly has a financial interest in taking me down. He wants to protect his own reputation, and that's exactly why he's spreading lies. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. The stakes had never been higher, and Elon knew that, for all his bravado, there was still a mountain to climb. Every accusation brought with it a risk of losing his reputation, his companies, and the very future he had worked so hard to build. Later that day, after a brief recess, Elon and his legal team sat in a private room, discussing their next move. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. We need to fight fire with fire, Maya said, her voice steely. If we keep playing defense, we're going to lose. We need to push forward, show the jury what we've built. Show them what we've done, not just for ourselves, but for them. Elon's mind was racing. His thoughts were scattered, but one thing was clear, this was more than just a legal battle. This was about the very nature of progress, about whether or not society could afford to wait for bureaucracy and regulation to catch up with technology. As the day wore on, the courtroom began to settle into a new rhythm. Elon's legal team prepared for their next round of questioning. But deep down, Elon knew that the hardest part was still ahead, proving that the vision was worth the sacrifices. That despite all the accusations, despite the betrayals, his mission was still the right one. And that, perhaps, would be his greatest challenge yet. The courtroom had taken on the atmosphere of a battlefield. There was a sense of quiet chaos, a lingering tension that no one could ignore. Each day felt like an eternity, and yet, with every passing moment, Elon Musk's resolve grew stronger. He could feel the pressure mounting, the stakes rising higher with each new revelation. But beneath it all, there was a deeper, more personal battle unfolding, one that no lawyer, no publicist, no strategist could help him with. It was late at night when Elon sat alone in his office, staring at the lit skyline outside his window. His mind raced with thoughts of the trial, of the people who had once stood by him and now seemed to be fading away. The guilt and doubt had started creeping in. What if, somewhere along the way, he had lost the very essence of what made his journey so meaningful? He reached for his phone, scrolling through messages. There were plenty of updates from his legal team, of course, but there was one message that stood out. From Elon Musk. Elon, we need to talk. It had been weeks since he'd heard from his brother. Kimball had always been the quieter of the two, but their bond had never wavered, until now. Elon dialed Kimball's number, the phone ringing 3 times before his brother picked up. Hey, Kimball's voice was calm, almost detached. Where have you been? Elon asked, a mix of concern and frustration in his voice. I could use your support right now, more than ever. This trial, it's spiraling. I know, Kimball replied. There was an uncomfortable pause. And that's why I need to talk to you. Elon sat up straighter, sensing the change in Kimball's tone. What's going on? Kimball's voice lowered, as if he was afraid someone might be listening. It's about Brad Connolly. There's something you need to know. Elon's heart skipped a beat. Brad had been a trusted ally, a key figure in Tesla's operations. But the moment Connolly had taken the stand, Elon knew things had started to unravel. What about him? Elon asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He's been talking to Vail, Kimball said, his voice tinged with disbelief. And not just in a casual way. He's actively working with them. Elon's grip tightened around the phone. I don't believe it. He wouldn't. I'm sorry, Elon, Kimball said, his voice full of regret. But it's true. Brad's been talking about how you pushed him into making decisions he wasn't comfortable with. He's also planning to take down Tesla from the inside if he can. Elon's mind was racing. Brad had always been one of the most loyal members of the team. He'd been there from the early days, through the long nights of uncertainty, the failed prototypes, the broken dreams. But now, he was the one trying to break it all apart. I need you to do something, Kimball continued. I don't care what it takes, but you need to neutralize him. He's the linchpin of Vail's entire case against you. Elon was silent for a moment, the weight of Kimball's words settling in. How did you find out? I have my ways, Kimball answered cryptically. But this has to end. The trial, the accusations, all of it. If you don't act fast, you'll lose everything. The phone call ended, but Elon remained in his office, staring at the city below. His mind raced, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what he'd just heard. Brad Connolly, his trusted ally, his friend, was now a threat. The cost of loyalty had never been more apparent. The next morning, Elon sat in the courtroom once again, facing the jury, his legal team surrounding him. Vail's team had grown bolder, more aggressive. Every time Elon looked around, he saw the faces of people who used to believe in him, now questioning his every move. But the biggest bombshell was yet to come. Vail stood up, calling forward a surprise witness. It wasn't Brad Connolly, no, this time, it was someone far closer to Elon. Your Honor, we call Lena Frazier to the stand. The room collectively gasped. Lena. The same Lena who had once been one of Elon's most trusted executives. She had left Tesla years ago, citing philosophical differences, but her testimony had sent shockwaves through the trial. Now, she was back, and Elon knew that whatever she was about to say would change everything. Lena walked to the stand with a cool demeanor, her face unreadable. She sat down, and Vail immediately launched into his questioning. Ms. Frazier, you have already testified that Mr. Musk pushed for practices that violated regulations. Can you elaborate on the nature of those violations? Lena paused before answering, clearly choosing her words carefully. Tesla's operations were always pushing the envelope, she began. And in many cases, we were encouraged, no, pressured, to overlook minor legal infringements for the sake of speed. But it wasn't just about that. It was about control. Vale nodded, pressing forward. Control over whom? Over all of us, Lena replied, her eyes now fixed on Elon. Elon Musk is a genius, but he doesn't always understand the human cost of his decisions. He isolates people, makes them feel like they're not important, that they're just a means to an end. It wasn't just the legal violations, it was the culture he created, the pressure to sacrifice everything for the sake of progress. Elon's stomach tightened as Lena's words struck home. She wasn't lying, but she wasn't telling the whole truth either. She had been part of that culture, had thrived in it, and now she was using it to destroy him. The room was silent, the jury listening intently to every word. Elon's heart pounded in his chest as he realized just how far things had gone. Lena wasn't just talking about the business, she was speaking about the heart of Tesla, the very thing that had made it succeed. And now, she was using that to tear him down. Later that night, after the courtroom session had ended, Elon met with his legal team in a private conference room. They were all exhausted, the weight of the trial hanging heavy in the air. "We need to shift the narrative," Maya said. "Lena's testimony is a game changer. We have to focus on the vision, the bigger picture. You need to show the jury that Tesla's success wasn't just about cutting corners. It was about changing the world. And that's what they need to believe." Elon nodded, the gears in his mind turning. He knew Maya was right. But the truth was, the trial had become more than just about Tesla. It had become about his entire legacy, everything he had built, and the cost of loyalty. The very people who had been closest to him, the ones who had helped him shape this revolution, were now his greatest adversaries. And in that moment, Elon realized that the price of loyalty was steeper than he had ever imagined. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The courtroom was tense, a living organism pulsing with the weight of Elon Musk's every word. The defense had just finished presenting their case for the day, but Elon's mind wasn't fully in the present. The weight of Lena's testimony had left a bitter taste in his mouth, and the reality of what was happening began to settle like a stone in his chest. He'd always known that ambition came with a cost, but never had he expected it to come at such a personal price. That night, as Elon sat in his penthouse office overlooking the city, a series of flashbacks began to invade his thoughts. He tried to shake them off, focusing on the task at hand, but the more he resisted, the more persistent they became. It was early days at Tesla, and Elon was in the middle of a high-stakes meeting. He had always been intense, a perfectionist to the core. He demanded excellence, and nothing less. But as the years passed, that drive had evolved into something more dangerous, something that could tear through everything around him. The early days had been full of sleepless nights, endless meetings, and a constant pressure to perform. There had been sacrifices, yes, but they had always been necessary, right? The dream of changing the world was bigger than any individual. Or so he told himself. But now, as the trial unfolded and the shadows of his past actions stretched long across the courtroom, he began to question that logic. Had it always been worth it? The lives ruined, the relationships destroyed, the sacrifices made for progress, was it all justified? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," Elon called out. It was Maya, his lead attorney, and she didn't look like someone bearing good news. "Elon, we've hit a major snag," she said, closing the door behind her and taking a seat across from him. "Vale's legal team is pulling out all the stops. We've just received word that there's more to the story of Lena's testimony. She's been in contact with the SEC." Elon's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "The SEC? Why?" Maya leaned forward, her voice low and urgent. "It seems she's been working with them for months, and now she's feeding them information about your financial dealings. Allegations of insider trading and market manipulation." Elon's stomach dropped. This was the kind of thing that could unravel everything. Tesla's entire rise had been built on the trust of investors, the public's belief in a clean, sustainable future. If these new allegations stuck, it wouldn't just be a legal battle, it would be the end of everything he'd worked for. Elon, we need to act fast, Maya continued. If the SEC gets involved, the media will jump all over this. You need to be prepared for a storm. Elon ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. How had it come to this? Lena, someone he had trusted, someone who had been there in the trenches with him, had turned on him. She was playing a dangerous game, and he was the pawn in her hands. The next day in court, the air felt even heavier. Elon had to steel himself against the storm that was rapidly approaching. But as the trial continued, the reality of his situation started to sink in. Each witness, each piece of evidence, each accusation, each one chipped away at the foundation he had spent years building. Vail's team presented their next big witness, Oliver Finch, a former insider from SpaceX who had worked closely with Elon in the early years. The moment Finch stepped onto the stand, the room seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Finch, you were once considered one of Elon Musk's closest confidants at SpaceX, Vail's attorney asked, his voice smooth as silk. Isn't it true that during your tenure at the company, you became aware of certain financial transactions that you would later describe as highly suspicious? Finch nodded, his eyes avoiding Elon's. Yes, I became aware of certain actions that I thought were irregular. There were transactions that seemed to benefit Elon personally, and they were structured in ways that didn't align with SpaceX's publicly stated goals. Elon's jaw clenched as he sat there, listening to Finch's words. The very man who had once worked by his side was now accusing him of financial misconduct. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a weaponized version of their shared past. And did you report these irregularities? Vail's attorney asked. I did, Finch answered, his voice betraying no hint of emotion. I made the report to the board. But it was clear to me that nothing would come of it. This was bigger than just one or two transactions. It was a pattern. And it involved people at the highest levels. Did Mr. Musk ever ask you to manipulate or conceal financial information? Vail's attorney pressed further. Finch hesitated. I never had direct conversations with Mr. Musk about concealing information. But, there were moments when things didn't quite add up. There were requests for secrecy that didn't make sense. And there was pressure to keep things moving forward, no matter the cost. Elon could feel the walls closing in on him. The man who had once been his ally now painted a picture of corruption and manipulation. Each word Finch spoke seemed to strike at the core of Elon's carefully crafted public image. The trial was no longer just a fight for his companies, it was a fight for his very identity. Later that night, as Elon sat alone in his office, he replayed the events of the day in his mind. He thought about the people who had come and gone in his life, those who had once stood by him, and those who now stood against him. He had always seen himself as someone who was reshaping the future, someone who had the courage to take risks others wouldn't. But now, it seemed that the very people he had trusted most were turning against him. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts again. Elon, there's someone here to see you, said his assistant. Elon didn't need to ask who it was. He already knew. Kimball. His brother entered the room, his face grim. You were right, Kimball said quietly, sitting down next to Elon. It's worse than I thought. There's more going on here than just the trial. People are digging into your past, looking for anything they can use to tear you down. Elon leaned back in his chair, staring blankly at the skyline. The weight of the situation was suffocating. I never imagined it would come to this. I thought we were building something good, something that would outlast us. But now I'm not sure what's left. Kimball placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. You've built a revolution, Elon. But revolutions come with casualties. You just have to decide whether you're going to let them win. Elon didn't answer right away. The darkness around him felt heavier with each passing day, and the storm on the horizon was only getting stronger. But one thing was clear, he wasn't going down without a fight. The courtroom buzzed with a palpable sense of unease, the weight of the trial threatening to crush the very air within. Elon Musk sat at the center of it all, his mind racing. The walls of the courtroom seemed to close in on him, each whisper, each glance, like a reminder that he was no longer in control. His world, the one he had worked so tirelessly to build, was slowly disintegrating in front of him. Lena's testimony had been just the beginning. Each day, the narrative against him grew darker, more personal. The allegations against him were piling up, each one more damning than the last. He could feel the tides of public opinion shifting, the very foundation of his empire trembling beneath him. He had always prided himself on being an innovator, a visionary, someone who changed the world. But now, in this courtroom, he was a man on trial, not just for his business practices, but for who he was. As the trial continued, Elon became aware of a deeper, more insidious truth. This was no longer just about Tesla, or SpaceX, or even his own future. It was about a complete dismantling of his legacy. The people who had once been his closest allies were now his fiercest adversaries. The very people he had trusted, the ones who had helped him climb to the heights of success, were now the ones seeking to bring him down. Mr. Musk, Vale's voice sliced through the air, dragging him back to the present moment. The prosecution would like to call another witness to the stand. Elon's heart sank. He had already seen how the last witness, Oliver Finch, had turned the tide against him. And now, as the doors to the courtroom opened, he saw who was stepping up to the stand next. It was Sarah Prescott, one of his earliest investors. She had been with Tesla almost from the beginning, a silent force behind the scenes. Her wealth had played a crucial role in the early days, helping to secure the funding needed to push the company forward. But now, as she approached the stand, it was clear that her role in this trial was no longer that of a supportive investor. She was about to play her part in destroying him. Ms. Prescott, Vale's attorney began, "Can you tell the court about your relationship with Mr. Musk, and specifically about the financial transactions that raised concerns during Tesla's early years?" Sarah's voice was calm, almost detached, as she began to speak. "I had been an investor in Tesla for several years. In the beginning, I believed in Elon's vision. But as the company grew, I began to notice discrepancies in the financial reports, irregularities that didn't align with what we were being told. I asked Elon about these issues, and while he was always quick to reassure me, there were always more questions than answers." Elon felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Sarah was one of the few people who had been able to challenge him in the early years, pushing him to be more transparent with his financial dealings. But now, hearing her speak in such cold terms about their relationship, it felt like another betrayal. "And did Mr. Musk ever ask you to conceal these financial discrepancies?" Vale's attorney pressed. "Yes," Sarah replied, her eyes briefly meeting Elon's across the room. "There were moments when Elon asked me to look the other way. To overlook certain transactions, to bury some of the less favorable financial reports. He told me it was all for the greater good of the company, that it was necessary to keep investors on board. But as time went on, I began to question whether this was truly about the greater good, or whether it was about saving his own skin." Elon sat still, every word from Sarah hitting him like a hammer. The walls were closing in. The people who had once been in his corner, who had helped him reach the heights of his success, were now using their positions to tear him down. After the session ended for the day, Elon retreated to his private office, feeling the weight of the trial crushing him from all sides. His legal team was already in the room, discussing strategy, but Elon barely heard them. His mind was elsewhere, on the trial, on his legacy, and on the people who had turned their backs on him. Maya was the first to notice his silence. "Elon, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady but with an edge of concern. "What's the latest?" Elon asked, his voice flat. Maya exchanged a glance with the other members of the team before answering. "Sarah Prescott's testimony is going to be a major problem. She's not just an investor, she was integral to some of Tesla's early moves. If we don't counter her claims effectively, it could undermine the entire foundation of Tesla's rise." Elon nodded, his mind spinning. "We need to find a way to expose the contradictions in her story. If she's lying, if she's twisting the truth, then we have to prove it. Maya hesitated. The problem is, her testimony aligns with the bigger narrative. Tesla wasn't just about innovation, it was about pushing boundaries, and sometimes, bending the rules. That's what the prosecution is using to paint you as someone who was willing to do anything to succeed, regardless of the consequences. Elon clenched his fists, frustration boiling over. But that's not who I am. I didn't create Tesla to break the law, I did it to change the world. I've always pushed the envelope, but I've never compromised my integrity. Maya looked at him, her expression softening. I know that, Elon. But right now, it's about perception. And the perception is that you were willing to do whatever it took to succeed. The conversation went on for hours, but nothing seemed to break through Elon's mounting sense of despair. The stakes were higher than ever, and with each new witness, the chances of victory seemed to slip further out of reach. As he walked out of his office late that evening, Elon's thoughts were clouded with uncertainty. He had always been a visionary, a pioneer who had reshaped industries, and yet, here he was, fighting for his future in a courtroom, under siege by the very people who had once believed in him. But amid the darkness, a flicker of something inside him stirred. He had always been a fighter. He had always believed in the impossible. And though the path ahead seemed uncertain, Elon Musk wasn't ready to give up just yet. In the quiet of his apartment that night, as he sat staring out at the city lights, the weight of the moment settled in. His world was unraveling, but there was still a part of him that refused to believe it was over. The abyss he was staring into was deep, but Elon Musk had never been one to shy away from the darkness. The sound of the gavel echoed through the courtroom, marking the start of another day in what had become Elon Musk's worst nightmare. Each day felt like a brutal war, each word, each accusation a fresh assault. His legal team was working overtime, scrambling to adjust their strategy in real time, but no one could deny that things were slipping further out of their control. Lena's testimony, coupled with Sarah Prescott's damning words, had painted a picture of a man who was willing to bend the rules to get what he wanted. The media was running wild with it. Headlines screamed about financial manipulation, about Elon Musk's dark side. The world seemed to be turning against him in ways he hadn't imagined possible. As Elon sat in the defense chair, trying to focus on the proceedings, his mind kept drifting to the bigger question: how much of this was true? Yes, he had pushed boundaries, he had always pushed boundaries, but had he crossed the line? Mr. Musk, the judge's voice cut through his thoughts. Are you prepared for the next witness? Elon blinked, surprised at how deeply his thoughts had taken him away from the trial. He nodded and straightened in his seat, mentally bracing himself for whatever was to come next. The doors to the courtroom swung open, and a figure stepped inside. It was John Maxwell, a former business partner of Elon's. Maxwell had been with him during the early days of SpaceX, helping to secure key contracts and funding. Their partnership had been one of mutual respect and shared ambition, but in recent years, they had grown apart. Elon had heard whispers that Maxwell was about to testify, but hearing it in the courtroom was another thing entirely. The man who had once stood by him now appeared as a witness against him, and Elon couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to be a turning point. Mr. Maxwell, please take the stand, the judge instructed. Maxwell approached the witness box, his demeanor calm, almost rehearsed. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had been in the industry for years, someone who knew how to play the game. But to Elon, his presence felt like a betrayal. Mr. Maxwell, Vail's attorney began, can you please explain your professional relationship with Mr. Musk and your role in the development of SpaceX? Maxwell's eyes flicked toward Elon, but he quickly averted his gaze. I was one of the original investors in SpaceX, and I worked closely with Mr. Musk during the early years. We shared a vision of revolutionizing space exploration. My role was to help secure funding and contracts, which I did with the understanding that our work would be above reproach. Vail's attorney leaned in, his voice lowering. And was there ever a time when you had concerns about the financial practices at SpaceX or Tesla? Maxwell hesitated. Yes, there were moments when I began to have doubts about some of the financial decisions being made. Specifically, I became concerned about certain fund transfers and the way certain contracts were structured. There were things that didn't sit right with me. Elon was always a visionary, but I started to wonder if he was willing to do whatever it took to succeed. Elon's stomach tightened as he listened to Maxwell speak. There it was again, the same narrative that had been building against him, a man willing to sacrifice anything, even his integrity, to win. And did you ever raise these concerns with Mr. Musk directly? Vale's attorney pressed. Maxwell nodded. I did. There were a few times when I voiced my concerns, but Elon was always quick to dismiss them. He would assure me that everything was under control and that the bigger picture was all that mattered. He always had an answer, a reason for everything. Elon felt a pang of anger rise within him. He had always made decisions with the future in mind, always thinking about the long-term goals. But now, as these men stood in front of him, telling the world that he was just a man driven by greed, the truth he had worked so hard to build felt like it was slipping away. Mr. Maxwell, Vale's attorney continued, can you tell the court about the moment when you realized that Mr. Musk's actions were, in your opinion, unethical? The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. This was it. The most damning accusation yet, that Elon Musk, the man who had changed industries, the man who had become synonymous with innovation, had misused company funds for personal gain. Elon sat frozen, his mind racing. How had this happened? How had his relationships with these men who had once believed in him, turned into a battleground? What had he done to deserve this? Maya, who had been quietly observing from the sidelines, finally spoke up. Elon, she said softly, this is it. If we don't rebut Maxwell's testimony with something concrete, it's going to stick. We need to find a way to discredit him. Elon didn't answer right away. His mind was spinning, but it wasn't just about the trial anymore. It wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about facing the truth. There was a part of him, a part he had buried deep, that had always known that the line between ambition and greed could be thin, and he had crossed it more times than he was willing to admit. The next few days were a blur of strategy meetings and sleepless nights. The defense team scrambled to counter the testimonies, but the truth was that the prosecution had struck a devastating blow. The evidence, the witnesses, the mounting accusations, they were all part of a larger, damning narrative. Then, late one night, as Elon sat alone in his office, something inside him shifted. The pressure, the betrayals, the endless accusations, they had all built to this point. And now, he had a choice to make. He could continue to fight, continue to deny the truth, continue to play the game. Or he could come clean, face the consequences of his actions, acknowledge the mistakes, and take responsibility for them. The price of truth was steep, and it was one that Elon had never been prepared to pay. But as he looked out over the city, the lights twinkling below like a distant promise, he realized that it might be the only way forward. The courtroom was eerily silent as the gavel struck, signaling the start of another day in Elon Musk's ongoing trial. It was the kind of silence that seemed to press down on everyone, the kind that made even the air feel heavy. There was a tension in the room, a sense of impending judgment that hung over Elon like a cloud. Elon had never been one to shy away from challenges. Whether it was launching rockets into space or revolutionizing electric vehicles, he had always believed that the future was something to be shaped, not feared. But now, as he sat in the courtroom, the future felt like a distant, elusive thing, something he could no longer control. The last few days had been a blur of testimony, of accusations, and of mounting pressure. Sarah Prescott and John Maxwell's testimonies had been devastating, each one chipping away at his defenses, forcing him to confront a side of himself that he had tried to ignore. The lies, the manipulation, the decisions made in the heat of ambition, it all felt like a distant echo now, but one that was too loud to ignore. But despite the overwhelming weight of the case against him, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that there was still hope. There had to be a way out of this. There had to be a way to salvage what was left of his reputation, his companies, and his legacy. That morning, as he walked into the courtroom, his mind was made up. The trial had reached a turning point, and it was time to face the truth, whatever the cost. He had spent years building his empire on the foundation of innovation and vision, but now that same empire was threatening to come crumbling down. The question was no longer whether he could win the trial, it was whether he could live with himself if he didn't. "Mr. Musk," the judge's voice broke through his thoughts, "are you prepared to present your defense?" Elon stood, his body feeling heavier than it ever had. His legal team had been working around the clock to find a way to counter the testimonies of the last few days, but the truth was, the evidence was mounting against him. There was no easy way out. "I am," Elon said, his voice firm but laced with an undertone of weariness. He could feel the eyes of the courtroom on him, the jury, the prosecution, even the press. But his gaze didn't waver. He had to do this. Not just for his companies, but for himself. The defense was ready to take its turn, but Elon wasn't going to rely solely on legal tactics anymore. Today, he would speak from the heart. His team had prepared a statement, but he knew that it wasn't enough. The world wasn't interested in legal jargon or technicalities, they wanted the truth. "Elon Musk is many things," he began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of everything that had happened. "I've always prided myself on being a visionary, on thinking bigger than anyone else. But I also know that vision alone isn't enough. There comes a time when your actions must align with your words, when your ambition can no longer be your only guide." There was a noticeable shift in the room as Elon spoke. The usual hum of murmurs quieted, and the eyes of the jury seemed to focus more intently on him. This was different. This wasn't the Elon Musk that had stormed into courtrooms and boardrooms with his usual bravado. This was a man who was finally acknowledging the consequences of his actions. "I've made mistakes," he continued, his words measured but honest. "I've done things in the pursuit of success that I'm not proud of. I've pushed the boundaries, sometimes too far, and I've let my ambition blind me to the people I was supposed to trust, the people I was supposed to protect." For the first time since the trial began, Elon saw a flicker of something in the eyes of the jury. Was it understanding? Compassion? He couldn't be sure, but it was enough to make him continue. "I can't undo the past," Elon said, his voice softening. "But I can take responsibility for it. I can own up to my mistakes. And I can promise that moving forward, I'll do better. For myself. For my companies. And for the people who have believed in me." His words hung in the air, suspended in the tension of the courtroom. The prosecution had spent days painting a picture of a man willing to do anything to win, to bend the rules and break the law in pursuit of his own success. But now, here was Elon Musk, admitting to his flaws, acknowledging his past mistakes, and taking ownership of his actions. For a moment, the courtroom was still. There was no cross-examination, no immediate rebuttal. Just silence. And then, as if in response to his words, the judge spoke. "Mr. Musk," the judge said, "you've just admitted to the actions that have been brought against you. This is significant. It shows a willingness to be accountable for the mistakes you've made. But the question remains, what now?" Elon took a deep breath. This was the moment. The reckoning he had been dreading. "What now?" he repeated softly. "What now is about rebuilding. It's about learning from my mistakes, about ensuring that the companies I've built are grounded in transparency, trust, and integrity." The defense team looked at each other in disbelief. They had prepared Elon for a fight, not a confession. But in that moment, Elon knew that the truth was the only thing that could save him now. "I've spent so much of my life focused on building something that would change the world," he continued. "But I've neglected the very values that made those dreams possible in the first place. Now, I have to make it right. Not just for the people I've wronged, but for myself. I owe it to the people who have stood by me, to my family, to my team, and to the world." The courtroom was silent, save for the sound of the gavel ringing again, this time signaling a recess. Elon sat down, his body heavy with the weight of what he had just done. His legal team was in shock, but there was something else, something deeper, that had shifted within him. As he stood up to leave the courtroom, his eyes briefly met those of the prosecution. There was no triumph in their gaze, no sense of victory. Just a quiet recognition of the power of truth. For the first time in this trial, Elon Musk had done more than just fight for his future, he had confronted his past. It was a small victory in a long and grueling battle. But it was a victory nonetheless. The price of truth had been high, but in that moment, Elon knew that it was the only price worth paying. The courtroom buzzed with a strange energy after Elon's heartfelt confession. For the first time in this trial, the tension in the air felt different. It was no longer just about legal strategies or legal arguments, it had become personal. Elon had thrown down a gauntlet, offering the truth, a stark contrast to the narrative that had been building against him. But whether that truth would be enough to save him remained uncertain. As the recess ended and the proceedings resumed, the weight of Elon's words seemed to hang over everyone in the room. His legal team, still reeling from the unexpected shift, tried to regain their footing. They had planned for every possible scenario, except for one where their client would admit to the very accusations they had worked so hard to deny. Elon Musk, Vail's attorney began, his voice laced with a mix of incredulity and opportunism, has admitted to the very actions that brought us here today. He has confessed to financial misconduct, to mismanagement, to unethical practices. How, then, can we possibly take his testimony at face value? The question landed like a heavy blow, and for a moment, Elon felt the full weight of his decision pressing down on him. There was no going back now. His admission had made it clear that the road ahead would be even more difficult. But he had made his choice. He had chosen honesty. We acknowledge Mr. Musk's willingness to take responsibility for his actions, Vail's attorney continued, but that does not absolve him of the consequences of his choices. His actions have caused harm. They've undermined trust, jeopardized investors, and hurt the people who relied on him. The word stung, but Elon refused to back down. He knew the road to redemption wasn't going to be easy, but he also knew it was the only way forward. The jury, the media, the public, they were all watching now, waiting to see how he would handle the fallout. After a few more questions, the defense was granted the opportunity to speak. Elon's attorney stood up, looking at Elon as if trying to gauge whether the man sitting at the defendant's table was truly the same person they had worked so hard to defend. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Elon's attorney began, his voice calm but forceful, yes, Mr. Musk has admitted to mistakes. But those mistakes were made in the pursuit of something greater. He didn't act out of malice or greed. He acted out of a belief that the future needed to be pushed forward. And in that process, he made errors. But does that make him a criminal? Does it make him someone who deserves to be vilified? Or is it the mark of a man who, like all of us, has struggled to balance ambition with responsibility? The attorney's words lingered in the air, but Elon wasn't sure if they would be enough to sway the jury. His confession had already shaken the foundation of the trial. Now, he had to hope that his honesty would be seen not as a sign of guilt, but as a sign of humanity. Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy was already reaching a fever pitch. News outlets were abuzz with headlines that ranged from "Musk admits to financial misconduct" to "A moment of truth, Elon Musk's shocking confession." Social media was equally divided, some praised his honesty, while others condemned him for his actions. One post on Twitter quickly went viral, "Elon Musk finally admits to his mistakes. Is it too little, too late?" #Musk trial, the responses were split. Some followers tweeted in support, "He's human. We all make mistakes. Give him a chance." Others were less forgiving, "If you break the rules, you pay the price." Musk is no exception. The media storm wasn't confined to the courtroom either. On Wall Street, the stock prices of SpaceX and Tesla saw sharp declines as investors reacted to the news. The company's financial stability, always a strong point for Elon, was now in jeopardy. At Tesla's headquarters, the executive team met in an emergency session. Rumors were swirling about whether the company could weather the storm. Would customers continue to buy Tesla vehicles? Would investors continue to support SpaceX? The fate of Elon's empire was now intertwined with the outcome of this trial, and the fallout was already being felt in every corner of his businesses. Meanwhile, Lena, still reeling from her testimony, was grappling with the consequences of her own actions. She had been part of the prosecution's star witness list, and while she had believed in the importance of the case, a lingering doubt had begun to settle in her mind. Was she just another pawn in a game she didn't fully understand? She had seen Elon's vulnerability in the courtroom, and it made her question everything. Was it too late for her to change sides? To speak out in his favor? The thought haunted her, but the pressure from her superiors at Vale's firm had been overwhelming. She couldn't help but wonder if she had made the right decision. At the Musk family compound, Elon sat alone, staring out over the sprawling estate. The silence of the room mirrored the emptiness he felt inside. The trial had consumed him, and now, with the truth laid bare, he was left to pick up the pieces. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Maya. "I know today was tough, but you did the right thing. You've always known that. Now let's focus on moving forward. This is just the beginning. We'll get through this." He stared at the message for a long moment, the weight of her words settling in. She was right. Admitting the truth had been the hardest thing he had ever done, but it was also the only way forward. He had spent his life building, creating, and pushing boundaries. Now it was time to rebuild, not just his company, but his reputation, his trust with the people who had stood by him. As the day wore on, Elon knew that the fallout would continue. The media would twist his every word, and his enemies would continue to attack. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of clarity. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was the road he had chosen. The days following Elon's confession were a blur of media scrutiny, legal maneuvering, and intense public debate. Every move he made, every word he spoke, seemed to send ripples through the world. The trial was far from over, but the damage had already been done. Now, Elon had to contend with the true consequences of his decision to come clean. In the courtroom, the tension was palpable. As the defense team tried to reinforce the idea of Elon's commitment to reform, the prosecution doubled down. They weren't letting go of the narrative that Elon's actions had been driven by greed, not a genuine desire to change. The jury, once swayed by his honesty, now seemed more divided. The opposing counsel, Rachel Bryant, stood tall as she addressed the jury. Elon Musk's admission of guilt may seem like a moment of sincerity, but don't be fooled, she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the silence. This isn't a story of redemption, it's a story of a man who has been caught, and now he's scrambling for any excuse to save himself. The damage he's done is not just to his companies, it's to the people who believed in him. Elon felt the sting of her words, but he remained composed. He had known the stakes from the beginning. This wasn't just about his legal defense, it was about something much bigger, his legacy, his future, and his chance to rebuild. His entire life had been defined by the desire to push the boundaries of possibility, but now, those same boundaries were closing in on him. "Mr. Musk," Bryant continued, turning to Elon, "you've had years to reflect on your actions, and yet, here we are, trying to piece together the damage you've caused. Do you truly believe that a simple confession can undo the years of exploitation, of manipulation?" Elon stood, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I don't expect anyone to believe that one admission can undo everything I've done," he began, his words measured. "What I am asking for is the chance to show that I can be better. That I can make amends. I've made mistakes, yes, but I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm asking for the opportunity to prove that I can change." For the first time in days, there was a pause. The courtroom was quiet, the tension almost palpable. But Rachel wasn't done. "Is that it, Mr. Musk?" "A promise to change," she countered, stepping toward him with an air of incredulity. "Do you think that's enough? You've manipulated the system for years, and now you expect the world to believe that your apology is the solution? The words stung, but they weren't new to him. He had faced critics his entire life, and now, in the face of his downfall, he had to face them again. This was his moment of truth, his moment to prove that his vision wasn't just about building rockets and electric cars, but about learning from his mistakes. Change takes time, Elon replied, his voice unwavering. But it starts with facing the truth. And I've done that. Now, it's up to me to show through my actions that I can be trusted again. I can't change the past, but I can shape the future. The jury seemed to waver, the opposing counsel's attacks beginning to lose their edge. For a moment, it appeared that the words of the man standing before them were starting to resonate. Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy had only intensified. Every headline screamed, Elon Musk, the reckoning, or, is redemption possible for Musk? The world was watching, and Elon knew that everything rested on how he navigated this moment. Back at his office at SpaceX, Elon sat alone in his private office, his hands clasped tightly together. His legal team was meeting with experts and strategists to figure out the next move, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being at a crossroads. His company, which had once been a symbol of innovation and progress, now faced the very real threat of collapse. Elon, came the voice of Maya, his chief strategist, as she entered the room. We need to talk. She looked at him with a mixture of concern and determination. Elon could tell that the gravity of the situation had set in for everyone around him. The trial wasn't just about his personal freedom anymore, it was about the future of everything he had built. I know, he said, his voice low. I know what's at stake. And I know that I can't keep running from my past. I've made mistakes, but I want to make things right. For the people who've believed in me. For my team. For the future. Maya nodded, her expression softening. I know you do. But this isn't just about saying the right things. People want to see change, Elon. They want to see you act differently. And right now, all we've done is react to the legal attacks. It's time to take proactive steps, show the world that you're serious. Elon leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He knew Maya was right. His confession had been the first step, but it wasn't enough. The world needed to see tangible change. They needed to see him take responsibility, not just in the courtroom, but in his companies, in his life. We're working on that, Maya continued. But we need to move quickly. If the jury doesn't buy your story, we could lose everything. And worse, the public may never trust you again. It was a harsh truth, but Elon appreciated her honesty. The weight of it all settled on him, but instead of retreating, he felt something inside him shift, a determination to face whatever came next. Then let's act, he said, a spark of resolve lighting up his eyes. Let's show them who I am. Let's show them that I'm more than just a CEO, more than just a businessman. I'm a person who is willing to fight for what's right. Back in the courtroom, as the day came to a close, Elon's legal team made their final argument. They focused on the tangible steps Elon was already taking to change his company's practices, to ensure accountability, and to make reparations where possible. Elon Musk may have made grave errors, but he is not the man he was yesterday, his lawyer stated. We ask for the jury's mercy, for the chance to prove that Mr. Musk is capable of redemption. We ask you to consider not just his past, but his future. The courtroom was silent as the closing arguments wrapped up. The jury filed out, their faces impassive. Elon stood, waiting for what felt like an eternity. In the hallways outside the courtroom, reporters clamored for interviews. But Elon didn't stop. He didn't answer any questions. Instead, he walked through the corridors, his mind already on what came next. This wasn't just about winning a trial. This was about winning back trust, earning respect, and proving that he could rise from the ashes of his own mistakes. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. The trial had lasted for weeks, each day more draining than the last, each argument more intense. And now, the moment of truth was finally upon them. Elon Musk had bared his soul to the world, admitting his mistakes, seeking redemption. His legal team had done their best to show the jury that he was more than just a man who had faltered, he was a man capable of change. As Elon sat in the defendant's chair, his mind wandered back to the day he had confessed. That moment, when everything had shifted. It felt like a lifetime ago, yet he knew that his admission had only been the beginning. The road ahead was still full of uncertainty. The next few hours, perhaps the next few minutes, could change everything. Beside him, his lawyer, Ben Halstead, was quietly speaking with a colleague, but Elon barely heard the words. His thoughts kept returning to the same question: would the jury believe him? Had his honesty been enough to redeem him, or would they see it as just another move in a game he'd been playing for years? At the other end of the room, Rachel Bryant, the prosecutor, had her eyes fixed on the jury box. She had been relentless throughout the trial, framing every one of Elon's decisions as a deliberate act of deceit. Her closing argument had been especially hard-hitting, accusing Elon of using his public persona to escape accountability. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Elon had said in his final statement. "I'm asking for the opportunity to show that I can do better. That I can fix what I've broken." His words had resonated with some, but there were others who weren't so easily swayed. The damage done to his companies, to his investors, to his employees, could it ever be undone? Could a few words make up for the years of mistakes that had led them to this point? The sound of the gavel echoed through the courtroom, signaling the end of the day's proceedings. The jury had gone into deliberation, and the waiting began. As Elon left the courtroom, he felt the weight of every step. He had become a symbol of both success and failure, a man who had built empires and watched them crumble. The world was waiting for the verdict, and so was he. Outside, the media swarm was relentless. Cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions. But Elon didn't stop. He had no answers for them, at least not yet. All he could do was walk forward, knowing that whatever happened next, his life would never be the same. Back at his private office, Elon tried to focus on the task at hand. The trial was over, but his companies still needed his leadership. He couldn't afford to let the uncertainty of the verdict consume him. But as the hours passed, his mind couldn't help but race. Maybe this is the price I pay, he thought, staring out over the skyline. Maybe all this, everything I've built, was always going to come with a cost. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Maya. "Just checking in. You've done everything you could. Now, let the chips fall where they may. Whatever happens, we've got your back." He smiled faintly. Maya had been his rock through all of this, someone who believed in him when the world seemed determined to tear him down. As the night wore on, he found himself pacing. Every possible scenario played out in his head. What if the jury found him guilty? What if they acquitted him, but the damage to his reputation was permanent? He had always been someone who thrived in chaos, someone who saw challenges as opportunities. But now, for the first time in a long time, he felt truly powerless. The next morning, the tension reached a fever pitch. The jury had returned, and the moment of truth was finally here. Elon stood in the courtroom, his palms sweating, his heart pounding. His legal team was by his side, but he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The judge called the court to order, and the room fell silent. The jury foreperson stood, holding the verdict in her hand. Elon could hear his own heartbeat, each thump echoing louder than the last. The eyes of the world were upon him. The foreperson's voice was steady as she read aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Elon Musk, guilty of financial misconduct. However, in consideration of his cooperation and sincere efforts toward restitution, we recommend a reduced sentence, pending further investigation into his actions. We also believe that Mr. Musk has taken significant steps toward reform, and therefore, we suggest that the severity of his punishment be adjusted accordingly." The words hit Elon like a tidal wave, crashing over him. It was a guilty verdict, something he had feared from the very beginning. But the reduced sentence, the recommendation for mercy, it was a lifeline. A chance to rebuild. As the courtroom erupted in murmurs, Elon remained still. The truth had been laid bare, but now, he had the opportunity to prove that redemption was possible. Outside the courtroom, the reactions were swift. Headlines began to fly. Elon Musk found guilty but faces reduced sentence. Musk's efforts toward reform to be considered in sentencing. A step toward redemption, jury shows mercy to Musk. The public's reaction was mixed. Some saw the reduced sentence as a sign that Elon could indeed be redeemed, that his apology had been genuine. Others felt that justice had not been fully served, that the punishment should have been harsher for the man who had once been regarded as one of the most influential figures in tech. At SpaceX and Tesla, the leadership teams held emergency meetings. The stock prices had already taken a hit following the trial's conclusion, and now the uncertainty about Elon's future loomed even larger. Would he still be able to lead? Would he be forced to step down? But for now, that was all secondary. Elon Musk had faced the storm, and though it wasn't the outcome he had hoped for, it was a chance to make things right. The road to redemption would not be easy, but it was the path he had chosen. Back at his estate, Elon stood alone in the quiet of his home, staring out at the horizon. The trial was over. The verdict had been delivered. But his journey was far from finished. He had learned a hard truth, that the price of ambition could sometimes be too high. But he had also learned that there was always a chance to make things right, to rebuild, to rise from the ashes. As he walked through his house, he passed by his office, where his work had once been his entire world. Now, it was time to rebuild his life. Time to rebuild trust. And perhaps, in the process, even rebuild his reputation. Elon took a deep breath, knowing that while the verdict had been rendered, the real work was just beginning. The days following the trial were nothing short of a whirlwind. Elon Musk had been found guilty, but with a reduced sentence and a recommendation for mercy. The courtroom battle was over, but the battle for his reputation, his very future, had only just begun. Elon's public image had taken a massive hit. Once heralded as the brilliant mind behind Tesla, SpaceX, and groundbreaking technologies, he was now seen by many as a cautionary tale. Some viewed him as a villain, a man who had exploited his position for personal gain, while others believed in the possibility of redemption. The verdict may have been a temporary victory, but Elon knew that it was just the beginning of a much longer, more difficult journey. At SpaceX, the tension was palpable. Elon sat in his office, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk. His once energetic team had grown cautious, unsure of how to proceed with their projects under the shadow of the trial. His employees were loyal, but loyalty only went so far in the face of public scrutiny. Maya walked into his office, her expression serious but resolute. "We need a plan, Elon. The longer we wait, the more this will affect everything we've worked for. SpaceX, Tesla, everything. People are losing confidence. We have to show them that we're still moving forward, still capable of innovating." Elon looked up at her, his gaze intense. I know what I need to do. It's not just about the companies, Maya. It's about proving to the world that I can be the leader they believed in, that I can rebuild trust from the ground up." Maya nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "It's going to take time, but if we're going to move forward, we need to show that we've learned from the mistakes. And not just through words. Actions, Elon. Real actions." Elon stood up and walked over to the window, gazing out at the bustling SpaceX campus. His mind raced with the possibilities of what could come next. He had built these companies with the same bold vision that had driven his success, but now, that vision had to be recalibrated. He had to make amends, not just with the public, but with the people closest to him. "First step," Elon said, turning to Maya. "We make things right with the teams. I'll hold an all-hands meeting with SpaceX and Tesla employees. I want them to hear directly from me about where we go from here. I'll also release a public statement about my commitment to change. Maya raised an eyebrow. A statement's not enough. You need to prove it. The investors are already jittery, and the media is watching your every move. You need to be transparent, take accountability, and show that you're actively fixing the problems. Not just with a speech, but with tangible actions. Elon nodded. I'll do that. I'll show them that I'm not just some tech mogul looking for excuses. I'll set up a new initiative to increase accountability within the companies. We'll focus on ethics, transparency, and corporate responsibility. I'll work with the teams directly, and we'll build back stronger than ever. The next day, Elon took the stage in front of the employees at SpaceX. The room was packed, and there was an air of nervous anticipation. For many, this was the first time they'd seen their CEO since the trial, and the mood was tense. Elon stepped to the microphone, his heart pounding. His legal battles had been difficult, but this was different. This was personal. This was about his people, the ones who had believed in him from the very start. He knew he had to be honest, transparent, and most importantly, vulnerable. For the first time, Elon Musk wasn't speaking as the indomitable visionary, he was speaking as a man who had stumbled, who had fallen, but who still believed in the future. Thank you for being here today, Elon began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I know the last few months have been difficult. For all of us. There's been a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions. And I want to address those head-on. The room was silent. Elon could feel the weight of their gazes on him, the skepticism, the hope, the doubt. But he pressed on. I've made mistakes. I've hurt people. And for that, I am truly sorry, he said, his voice unwavering. I've spent my life pushing for innovation, for change, for progress. But I didn't always stop to consider the impact my actions had on the people around me. And that's something I have to live with. He paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. His eyes searched for understanding, for a sign that his words were reaching them. I want you to know that I am committed to doing better. Not just as your CEO, but as a person. I will work harder to ensure that our values align with our actions. We will be more transparent, more accountable, and we will work together to rebuild the trust that has been lost. There was a long silence before one of the engineers from the back of the room stood up, slowly clapping. It wasn't a loud applause, but it was enough to break the tension. One by one, others joined in, and soon the entire room was clapping, though it was clear that many were still cautious. Elon took a deep breath. It was just a small step, but it was a start. Later that day, as Elon sat in his office reflecting on the meeting, he received a call from Richard Branson, one of his mentors and someone who had watched him grow over the years. Congratulations, Elon, Richard's voice crackled over the line. That was a solid step in the right direction. But remember, words are only the beginning. The real work begins now. I know, Elon replied, rubbing his temples. I've got a long way to go, but I'm ready to put in the work. I won't let this define me, not the trial, not the mistakes. I'll show everyone that I can come back stronger. That's the spirit, Richard said. It won't be easy, but you've got the resilience to pull this off. Just don't lose sight of what you're fighting for. Keep your eyes on the future. Elon smiled faintly. I will. Thanks, Richard. The following weeks were a blur of strategy meetings, restructuring initiatives, and outreach efforts. Elon worked tirelessly to not only rebuild SpaceX and Tesla's internal culture but also to change the way the public viewed him. He implemented new transparency initiatives, holding quarterly meetings with investors, and setting up open forums for employees to voice concerns. He also began focusing on social impact projects, pushing for innovation in sustainability, education, and healthcare. The more he worked, the more he realized that his journey wasn't just about regaining his place at the top, it was about leaving a legacy of positive change. The world was watching closely. Some remained skeptical, but others began to believe in the possibility of Elon's redemption. He wasn't just a CEO anymore, he was a man trying to make things right, and that effort, that journey, was what ultimately began to win people over. He paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. His eyes searched for understanding, for a sign that his words were reaching them. I want you to know that I am committed to doing better. Not just as your CEO, but as a person. I will work harder to ensure that our values align with our actions. We will be more transparent, more accountable, and we will work together to rebuild the trust that has been lost. There was a long silence before one of the engineers from the back of the room stood up, slowly clapping. It wasn't a loud applause, but it was enough to break the tension. One by one, others joined in, and soon the entire room was clapping, though it was clear that many were still cautious. Elon took a deep breath. It was just a small step, but it was a start. Later that day, as Elon sat in his office reflecting on the meeting, he received a call from Richard Branson, one of his mentors and someone who had watched him grow over the years. Congratulations, Elon, Richard's voice crackled over the line. That was a solid step in the right direction. But remember, words are only the beginning. The real work begins now. I know, Elon replied, rubbing his temples. I've got a long way to go, but I'm ready to put in the work. I won't let this define me, not the trial, not the mistakes. I'll show everyone that I can come back stronger. That's the spirit, Richard said. It won't be easy, but you've got the resilience to pull this off. Just don't lose sight of what you're fighting for. Keep your eyes on the future. Elon smiled faintly. I will. Thanks, Richard. The following weeks were a blur of strategy meetings, restructuring initiatives, and outreach efforts. Elon worked tirelessly to not only rebuild SpaceX and Tesla's internal culture but also to change the way the public viewed him. He implemented new transparency initiatives, holding quarterly meetings with investors, and setting up open forums for employees to voice concerns. He also began focusing on social impact projects, pushing for innovation in sustainability, education, and healthcare. The more he worked, the more he realized that his journey wasn't just about regaining his place at the top, it was about leaving a legacy of positive change. The world was watching closely. Some remained skeptical, but others began to believe in the possibility of Elon's redemption. He wasn't just a CEO anymore, he was a man trying to make things right, and that effort, that journey, was what ultimately began to win people over. The path to redemption was never meant to be easy, and for Elon Musk, it proved to be a grueling journey of self-reflection, accountability, and growth. Each step he took felt like a breaking point, a moment of reckoning, a decision that would either solidify his place as a symbol of transformation or sink him back into the abyss from which he had risen. SpaceX was recovering. The employees, though still cautious, were slowly regaining their trust. Investors had responded positively to Elon's increased transparency and the strides he had made toward ethical leadership. But the road wasn't just about fixing the damage to his companies, it was about fixing the damage done to himself, to his very identity as a visionary, a pioneer. At night, when the world was quiet and his thoughts were loudest, Elon would often find himself staring at the stars, thinking about the big picture. The Mars colonization project, the electric revolution, the vision that had once driven him to the brink of obsession. It had always been about more than just business. It had been about changing the world. But now, something had changed inside him. The need to conquer, to achieve the impossible, had been tempered by the reality of the consequences of those ambitions. He couldn't escape the guilt of the past, the choices he had made, the people he had hurt along the way. Maya, who had been his steadfast advisor through it all, approached him one evening, sensing the shift in his demeanor. "You're not the same person you were before the trial, Elon," she said, sitting across from him at his desk. "I can see it. And I think that's a good thing." Elon looked at her, his face tired but determined. "I've spent my life chasing bigger and bigger goals, Maya. But I've neglected the very things that matter most. I wasn't just wrong in how I led my companies, I was wrong in how I lived my life. It's about more than just what I can accomplish. It's about who I become in the process." She nodded slowly, her expression softening. "And that's why you're doing things differently now. You're rebuilding everything, your leadership, your relationships, even your own sense of self. But it's going to take time, Elon. It's not about erasing the past, it's about learning from it." Elon exhaled, leaning back in his chair, looking out of his office window. The view of Tesla's electric cars lined up in the parking lot, the sleek SpaceX rockets reaching toward the sky, it had always been his dream to change the future, but he had overlooked the importance of the present. He had been so focused on the destination that he had ignored the road he had traveled to get there. "I used to think the future was everything," Elon said quietly. "But now I know that it's the people we impact today that shape the future. If I can't make things right now, then the future is just an empty promise." Over the next several months, Elon focused on transforming himself as much as he focused on transforming his companies. He restructured the leadership at Tesla and SpaceX, bringing in fresh perspectives, new voices, people who could challenge him, hold him accountable, and help steer the companies in a more ethical direction. His role had shifted. He was no longer just the CEO and visionary, he had become a mentor, a collaborator, someone who listened as much as he led. He began working with a team of psychologists and coaches, focusing on personal growth, leadership development, and emotional intelligence. He participated in meditation retreats, something he had previously dismissed as a waste of time. But it was during those retreats that he discovered the power of introspection, the importance of understanding his own emotions and the impact his behavior had on those around him. But perhaps the hardest part of all was confronting the people he had wronged. It was one thing to apologize publicly, but it was another to go face to face with those who had been directly hurt by his actions. One afternoon, he sat down with Jim Johnson, a former investor in Tesla who had suffered significant financial losses during the scandal. Jim had been one of the loudest critics during the trial, and Elon knew this conversation wouldn't be easy. "Elon," Jim began, his voice neutral, "I'm not here to rehash the past. What's done is done. But you've got my attention now. You've made some serious changes. The transparency, the initiatives, it's all good, but the proof is in the pudding, isn't it?" Elon nodded, his expression sincere. "I know. And I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to prove that I'm capable of being the leader I should have been from the start. I want to make things right, Jim. Not just for myself, but for everyone I've impacted." Jim studied him for a long moment. "You're a different person now, Elon. I'll give you that. But don't think you can just make it all go away with a few changes. Trust is earned. And that takes time." "I understand," Elon said quietly. "And I'm committed to earning that trust, one day at a time." The press conferences that followed were equally challenging. Reporters had once hung on his every word, eager to catch the next headline-making statement. Now, they were more skeptical, more discerning. Elon knew that nothing he said would be enough to change their minds immediately. The press had a job to do, and they weren't ready to let him off the hook just yet. But over time, Elon noticed a shift. The headlines that once read, "Musk Scandal" or "The Fall of a Tech Titan," slowly began to change. More stories began to focus on the tangible changes within Tesla and SpaceX. They reported on the new transparency measures, the ethical reforms, the advances in sustainable energy and space exploration. The narrative was evolving, one story at a time. Public opinion was still divided. Some were still doubtful, but others were starting to see the person behind the headlines, the effort he was putting into repairing the damage. It wasn't just about defending himself, it was about taking responsibility, accepting the consequences of his actions, and making amends. A year later, at a global SpaceX press event, Elon stood before an eager audience, announcing the next phase of their Mars mission. This time, there was no bravado, no arrogance. Just a quiet confidence that came from knowing he had earned a second chance. "We're not just sending rockets to Mars," he said, his voice steady, we're sending a message. A message that, no matter how far we've fallen, we can always rise again. We can always change. And we can always work to make the world a better place. The applause was genuine, louder than any he had heard before. It was a small but significant victory, a testament to the transformation that had taken place, both in his companies and in himself. Elon had learned that the true power of leadership didn't lie in being perfect, it lay in the ability to learn, to grow, and to adapt. The future he had once dreamed of so obsessively was still within his reach, but it was no longer just about the technology or the rockets. It was about how he led people, how he restored trust, and how he used his power to positively impact the world. The chains of his past had been broken, but the journey was far from over. The transformation was ongoing, and Elon Musk was no longer just the man who built empires. He was the man who was determined to rebuild them. The world had been watching every step of Elon Musk's journey. From the trial that nearly destroyed his career to the painstaking process of rebuilding trust, it had been a saga of triumph, failure, self-reflection, and eventual redemption. Now, as he stood at the precipice of a new era, Elon knew one thing for certain: the future was no longer just about space exploration or sustainable energy. It was about humanity itself and the potential for change. Elon Musk's legacy was no longer confined to the sleek lines of Tesla cars or the promising expanse of Mars. It was about more than just technological advancements, it was about shaping the future with a deeper understanding of responsibility, collaboration, and growth. He had seen the best and worst of himself, had made the most difficult decisions of his life, and yet, here he stood, still pursuing the ultimate goal, to leave the world better than he found it. The SpaceX headquarters had transformed from a place of tension to a symbol of innovation and resilience. Inside, the atmosphere was filled with excitement and purpose. Employees no longer looked at their work with the cynicism that had crept in after the scandal. They had witnessed firsthand the changes Elon had undergone, not just in the boardrooms, but in the way he approached people, the way he valued transparency, and the way he genuinely sought to listen and understand. That morning, Elon stood in front of a crowd once again, not to announce the next big project or to outline ambitious goals, but to mark a milestone in his personal journey. This speech wasn't about his company, it was about the lessons learned, the personal growth he had experienced, and the future he envisioned for the next generation of leaders. "I've spent my life focused on pushing the boundaries of what's possible," he began, his voice calm yet powerful. "But what I've come to realize is that it's not enough to create the future we want if we don't take responsibility for the path we take to get there. For too long, I was caught in the pursuit of innovation at any cost. I thought that creating something world-changing would be enough. But I've learned that the process is just as important as the product. The people we touch, the relationships we build, the way we approach leadership, all of that matters just as much, if not more." The crowd sat in rapt attention, their eyes fixed on Elon. It was the first time many of them had heard him speak with such humility, with a clear acknowledgement of his past mistakes and a commitment to do better. He wasn't the same person they had followed years ago. He was different, more grounded, more thoughtful. "I'm not here to erase my past," he continued. "I'm here to build on it. The mistakes I made, the people I hurt, and the lessons I've learned have shaped who I am today. I can't change that, but I can ensure that I use everything I've experienced to create a better, more inclusive future for everyone." The room erupted in applause, not just because of the words Elon had spoken, but because of the sincerity that radiated from him. This was a man who had truly evolved. He had fallen hard, and yet, he had risen even higher. His journey of self-redemption had inspired more than just his employees, it had inspired the world. Later that evening, as Elon sat in his office overlooking the quiet expanse of the SpaceX launch pad, he reflected on everything that had led him to this moment. The legal battles, the public backlash, the sleepless nights, all of it had been a crucible for transformation. And through it all, he had found a deeper purpose, one that extended beyond his companies and the technologies he had created. The moon hung low in the sky, a reminder of the future he had always dreamed of. But now, that future was more than just the quest for interplanetary colonization. It was a future where humans could truly evolve, emotionally, spiritually, and ethically, not just technologically. Maya walked in, holding a cup of coffee. She smiled as she saw him staring out the window. "Penny for your thoughts." Elon chuckled softly. "Just thinking about how far we've come. It wasn't an easy journey, but I think we're finally heading in the right direction. I've got a long way to go, but at least now I know what really matters." Maya took a seat next to him. "You've already changed the world, Elon. It's not just about the rockets anymore. It's about the people you've inspired to think differently, to act differently. You've shown that it's possible to rise from the ashes, to rebuild when everything seems lost. And that's what will be remembered." "I hope so," Elon replied. "But what I really hope is that the next generation takes it further. I've always believed in pushing the boundaries, but now it's about doing it in a way that's responsible, ethical, and grounded in the right values. I want to inspire others to lead with integrity, to be transparent, and to build a future where we don't just solve the world's problems with technology, we solve them with compassion and wisdom." As the years passed, Elon's companies, SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, and the Boring Company, continued to thrive, not just because of the technologies they developed, but because of the culture they had fostered. A culture of collaboration, of ethical leadership, and of a deep commitment to making the world a better place. The public's perception of Elon had also transformed. He was no longer just the controversial tech mogul. He had become a symbol of resilience, of the power of self-reflection, and of the possibility of change. His name would forever be associated with groundbreaking achievements in space and energy, but more importantly, it would be synonymous with the idea that anyone, no matter how high they rise or how far they fall, could always evolve for the better. In the final years of his leadership, Elon looked back on everything he had achieved, not just the rockets launched, the cars sold, or the projects completed, but the human connections he had forged, the lives he had impacted, and the legacy of change he had left behind. His final message was simple, yet profound. The future is not just what we build, but how we build it. It's not just about what we achieve, but who we become in the process. And if we can change the way we approach leadership, change the way we treat each other, and change the way we view the world, then anything is possible. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?